Hey, what's going on, guys? Boki here. Today I wanted to talk about what the heck happened to the development of physics and destructive environments in video games, but also how their overall presence alone can relate to player agency and freedom. Quite a few years ago, a lot of people seemed to be excited about this, and I think many of us thought that the next few years will bring tons of progress in these areas. But to me, it seems that instead we got nice graphics, battle royales, and complete absence of environmental damage and good physics engines. Static worlds, right? I mean, you shoot the box, and the box is still there. But maybe I've missed something. Are there any new or, maybe not new games with solid physics engines? And not only destruction-driven games, right? Or high-impact shooters like Fear. Because really, the whole topic came to my mind because the ex-DICE developers that made games like Battlefield Bad Company 2, now named Embark Studios, are making a new multiplayer game called The Finals, and I'm excited to see what this game is capable of. And for those that don't know, it's a team-based, free-to-play so-called virtual combat game show shooter that promises to push the environmental destruction and player freedom to the limits. So we'll see how that goes. I'll just put some gameplay of that in the background now, because I'm fairly excited for this game and its potential. Now, I see a lot of people blaming the power of the 8th generation consoles and their CPUs as to why physics-based games are absent for the time being, but that isn't true. Game developers will adapt to their hardware. The real issue is that creating a physics-based game takes a lot of time for debugging and testing. With a static game, the developers can test edge cases very easily and generally know what causes it easily. But with a physics game, the problem can stem from multiple issues. The issue could be that the player ends up cheesing the level, so you have to design a level in a way that prevents the users from breaking the geometry. Or the issue could be that the player could inadvertently lock themselves out of a room from moving forward. Or the player could destroy a vital piece of cover. Really, the freedom of physics makes more situations the game developers have to account for. Most physics games are designed with that physics in mind. Just simply inserting physics into a game can break a lot of the game flow. Just look at the Rainbow Six Siege trailer versus the launch game. Graphics downgrade and vertical slice aside, the trailer had unlimited freedom when it came to environmental destruction. But trying to play a competitive shooter with that level of unpredictability isn't really fun because the players can't plan around the unexpected. That's why in the retail game, the players are limited on what they can destroy and where they can breach. I miss Rainbow Six Siege. Shout out to Macy J. Hardware-wise, we got more power than we used to have, so we're not limited by that really. It's a design decision. For a single-player game, right? If I'm a game developer, I want you to go from point A to point B through a relatively well-defined path. That way, you get to see all the cool stuff that the artists made, the hidden clues, and the story beats I want you to see. If you can just attach some random C4 to any wall and just bust in, I need to stop you from accidentally experiencing things out of order, or skipping things that you shouldn't, right? So I'll just make some kind of indestructible walls. If you can collapse a whole building because it's realistic physics, well then I can't be sure that you'd experience anything in a level, really. It also means instead of just doing a Hollywood Western town and only creating the parts of the level that we need just to save time and money, I'd now have to dedicate resources to making sure that there's something else on the other side of those walls. There's still game engine limitations, so there's going to be some kind of artificial barrier that stops you wandering off the level. Even with Far Cry 2, right, back in the day, setting stuff on fire was novel, but it wasn't evoking the right reactions in players at times. The first time you burn a place down, it's great, but later on you don't really want that to happen because fire spreads easily, and if it does, it's not really fun to deal with. So that leaves us with multiplayer games, right? Destruction cover is a huge thing. That's pretty much what Fortnite has been about, but again, it's always a trade-off between what's fun and what's realistic. As a sandbox, it's kind of fun for a while to destroy environments, but the novelty wears off fast and you want something more. Current games reflect that right now. Restrictions breed creativity and enjoyment. And speaking of that, do you guys remember Battlefield Bad Company 2? It was amazing for its time. The destruction of Battlefield Bad Company 2 was such a fun feature of the game. Everyone I knew loved it, and it made for some awesome experiences. You see a bunch of guys in a house giving you trouble? No problem. Blow up the whole building. You could dig long trench lines with C4 by yourself, or just make big holes for an enemy tank to fall into. It really fostered some creativity, provided it didn't bug out and then you fell through the world, that is. It was the first game I stood on top of a hill and just saw complete destruction. The entire map was ground level, where there would be no buildings left standing and everything would be destroyed. And at the time, there was only like 32 players in a match. You're playing rush mode, and it was just one of the best games I've ever played in my life. In my opinion, it's not only about the destruction itself, but also how you implement it. Having destruction for destruction's sake is just a resource-intensive, but ultimately useless feature. Destruction has to tell a story. You should be able to deduct deduct what happened in this location just by observing the aftermath. In my opinion, we reached the pinnacle of meaningful destruction in this game. For example, you remember Atacama Desert Map in multiplayer? Attackers had to advance against the opposing force that was entrenched in buildings. Depending on how equal the teams were, the town would either be almost untouched if the attackers steamrolled the defenders, or almost completely devastated if the teams were actually equal and the fighting was fierce. Your actions had lasting consequences, and it was awesome to be a part of and see that. I might be a little biased because yeah, I was a little more impressionable back then, but future Battlefield iterations failed to recreate the same level of destruction. Sure, it's cool to see a skyscraper come down and a big ship run ashore for like 3 times, but after that, it becomes mundane. No one cares. Battlefield Bad Company 2 had massive multiplayer matches, fun game modes, and relatively realistic environmental destruction. It was the first game I played where you can take down almost any building with strategically placed C4 or grenades, or just by blowing it to pieces with a tank. As the years went on with the franchise, it seemed as though the destruction physics started to fade bit by bit. The expectation at that time for Battlefield 3's destruction physics, at least from my clueless teenage perspective, was for there to be a significant improvement from Bad Company's destruction physics. But in my opinion, even at the time and looking at it right now, it was definitely a step back. Instead of getting advanced destruction physics, they just made some walls collapsible, which really just turned to be repetitive animation. And you could shoot through some of them, but no destruction on a large scale, like destroying and collapsing entire buildings. Seeing the dense urban setting for Battlefield 3 gave me hope that, maybe you could level an entire city block in the middle of Paris. Instead, players were delivered an experience more similar to Call of Duty, with more realistic physics and some destructive walls. Needless to say, it seemed as though the Battlefield franchise withered because they removed the destruction physics and how creative you could be with it. Don't get me wrong, I think they were fun games, right? Battlefield 3 was good, Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1, they were fun games, but nothing like Bad Company 2 from my experience. What I also want to get into alongside of physics, I also want to dive into general reactivity. I am of the impression that too many games waste too much money, attention, man-hours, and creativity on meticulously guided and guide-railed player experiences. Instead of systems that can interact and organically create unforeseen outcomes, they craft and curate the player experiences with the heaviest of hands, right? Cutscenes, QTEs, save points, it's like the less agency the player has, the more happy the average big game developer, or rather their employer, is. I don't think it's a question of stagnating processing power either. We had environmental interactions before, like drop flour and water on each other, create some dough, throw that dough into a fire, create some bread. That was over 20 years ago. Yeah, heavy physics use in particular is probably taxing of systems, but somehow almost nobody even tries except for indie games. When I was binging Valheim when that came out, I loved that they at least seemed to embrace the core concept of not making its own little system for every little aspect into the game, but to create systems that interact freely. And this is what I mean, right? Instead of having a subsystem to tame creatures, the game just uses its core systems. You build a pen, you lure a boar into that pen, drop some food into it that it likes, sneak away, and the boar will chew on the food. You do that enough times without upsetting the boar, and it'll tame. Every one of those components is a general game component, and it's not specific to taming. You build stuff all the time. You use food yourself, you drop items you don't want or need at the moment, and you sneak around to avoid or drop enemy attention as well. Same with breeding hens in the game. Fire is already a system used to keep the player warm and dry, and to roast your meat. So if you just drop an unhatched egg near it, it'll hatch eventually. Of course, because Valheim does general reactivity, the hatchling is curious, and it may just well run into the fire, killing itself. So building a barrier around the fire, out of generally used components helps keep the little chick safe. This works so well that you can actually set up semi-automatic breeding facilities that function on those general principles without much player input. Now, it may result in some unexpected benefits or limitations, but they are logical and consistent across everything. A game is only a game when defined and limited by a set of rules, and learning to work with those rules to achieve goals is what makes a game fun. Like, think of reality itself, right? It follows some pretty basic rules, and people have literally gone to the moon by understanding and exploiting them. The creation of basic, even simple rules that when combined result in complex and interesting behaviors. Now, I can only speak as a player, right? Because that's my specialty. And just to clarify, I don't make the games, I just enjoy the creation. But this is fundamentally what I appreciate about games: to be given tools that react and interact, and to be able to use that interaction for creative problem-solving, emergent gameplay, right? Like, for most people, I'm sure they get relatively little gratification out of just playing out some intended solution, and being restricted from using things in all but the one intended way just vexes me. I wish more developers had the guts or mind to focus on system-centric games. It seems like big games are mostly just overproduced movies at this point. But here's the thing, some games can pull off a railed approach while keeping the player feeling like they have agency. Red Dead Redemption 2 does it very well, in my opinion. opinion. Most all of those missions in the game have clear fail states, they have clearly laid out options, but the game still feels free and up to the player since they give you those choices and they interweave the open world and the morality choices into nearly every other game dynamic. Plus the random encounters are well designed too.
Well, look at you. You look pretty drunk, partner.
Probably the biggest thing that Rockstar does well though is their timing, and it will perfectly choose a time to present you a certain moment or choice that pulls you right back in every single time, and it makes the playthrough feel unique even though there's like 4 preset endings. I think more guided games can be good, but too many developers can't or won't put in the effort to make an experience like Red Dead Redemption 2, where the story, while already laid out, still gives the illusion of deeper choices and a unique player experience. Because on the other hand, and dude, I'm gonna regret saying this, but this is my honest opinion, okay? I understand that not everyone's going to like this opinion, but here we go. Breath of the Wild really isn't that fun of a game. Yep, just kill me now. Breath of the Wild has a laughably bad story, terrible voice actors, last-gen graphics, 5 enemies that are copied and pasted all over the world, a world that is huge but mostly empty, a terrible system for weapons breaking, no crafting, cooking is tedious and boring, huge frame drops throughout the game despite being a AAA game developed specifically for one console by that console's creator, repetitive puzzles all over the world, only 4 dungeons that lack diversity, a soundtrack that is uninspiring, and the entire experience lacks any real challenge to speak of. However, the physics of the world and the weapons they give you are super fun. The glider, the magnet, freezing obstacles and enemies and time, the crazy exploits that can send you flying across the map, etc., right? I mean, those are the reasons why Breath of the Wild is fun. Like I said, I don't even think it's that good of a game. It's just a fun sandbox engine attached to a low-quality game with an IP that is immortal. Look at games like Celeste, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Hollow Knight, Journey, Rocket League, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, Minecraft, Apex Legends even, okay? These games are all primarily great games because of their physics. At the end of the day, in my opinion, most good games are almost always good physics playgrounds. Most great games require great physics, and if they nail things like graphics and story as well, then the games can become legendary. Guys, that's all I got. Like and subscribe if you like content like this. And what kind of examples of physics do you enjoy in games? What's your take overall? I'd love to hear about it. We will see you in the next one. Later.
Hey, this is your boy Boki. Can't make it to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you. Peace. Hey, Boki! Wow! I just gotta say, your last upload about video game physics was the bee's knees. Now I'm 52 years old and I've been browsing this YouTube platform for quite some time, but I don't think any other gaming content is even close, dude. I'm dead serious when I say that. You know what? Just keep the machine going so the audience listens to this. Hey, video watcher, subscribe to Boki now or I'll show up to your house and beat that ass. But yeah, call me back, man.